Hi everybody, I hope you can hear and see me. This is Sadie Watson here. I'm going to be chairing the session today. Thanks very much for joining us. Now, I had hoped that this would be a nice informal lunchtime chat session. Of course, this particular portal that we use in GoToWebinar isn't particularly informal. In fact, it's about as formal as these things get, unfortunately. So I apologise for that. But there are some ways that you can interact with us, and I'll be telling you about that in a second. I think the plan is, well, I know that the plan is that I'll introduce Kate briefly now and tell you a bit about how the system works. Kate will talk for 35 minutes-ish, and then after that we'll have time for questions and chat, and at that point we can invite you all to speak. Okay, so as I say, I'm chairing, and you should be able to see my screen, hopefully. Here we go. So this is what you might see, and your own ways of interacting with the portal are up here. So the orange arrow, if you pull it out and in, you can see all the different options. You're muted at the moment, of course, and I'm afraid your webcams are also off. But during the course of the Kate's talk, you can either enter things into the chat for me if you have a problem with the GoToWebinar portal or anything that you want to bring up about the process of the event, then you can enter them into the chat. And any questions for Kate or for me, please put them in the questions bit over here, and I will introduce them to Kate at the end, or I will unmute you if you'd rather be unmuted, and I'll give you the option. I'll ask you, actually, would you like to voice your question yourself? So I think that is all I have to do in terms of how to use the actual system. I'm gonna stop sharing. There we go. Okay. So we're back again. So as I say, thank you very much for coming along to hear about the latest research from our project we've been doing at MOLA over the last 1.5 years, 2 years now, in fact. I'm really pleased to be able to introduce my colleague, Kate Faccia, who's been leading on the outward-facing, public-focused aspects of our research, looking at public benefit from development-led archaeology. Now, I will be recording Kate's talk, but I'll be recording the questions as well. But actually, we might edit the questions out when we put this up online. So please feel free to ask any sort of questions that you like, and we can edit them out later for the publicly presented version. So back to Kate then. Kate's PhD was in osteology at the University of Calgary several years ago, and after that she worked as a postdoc at the University of Cambridge over here in the UK, studying Mesolithic forages of the Baltic. Kate also, much like me, has an extensive fieldwork career, particularly at MOLA, where she excavated sites as diverse as the Roman waterfront with me, 16th century Shakespearean playhouses, and of course, many hundreds of Georgian and Victorian human burials at St James's Gardens for HS2. Now, as I said, Kate's research focus for this particular project was on the public consultation, and she will give you more information and background about that. But she's been leading on establishing new contacts really across the sector and beyond to see how we can embed public benefit in development-led archaeology. Now, we will be sending out an email after this with links to more information about the research framework that Kate used for this survey, because she hasn't got time to go into all the details, obviously, today. But I think if you're ready, Kate, I'm going to... there you are. Hello. I'm going to make you the presenter.
Okay.
And you should hopefully be able to share your screen really easily now. If it's as seamless as it was earlier on when we practiced. There we go.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Let me get the screen up. That's the first thing.
I'm going to mute myself and turn my camera off as well, because that gives everyone more space.
Okay. And can you see this?
Yes, we can. Perfect. Yeah, lovely. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Sadie, and I'd like to thank you all for coming today. I'm not sure who all is here on the list, but for those I've met or who have interacted with us, our survey helped us spread the word. Just thank you so much for your help in that. And we've been trying to operate and do all of this during the time of COVID, so it's made it a little more difficult and more reliant on online technology. So my thanks to you. Today I'm going to talk about the public benefit, the public survey results. I figured that's what most people here would be interested in hearing about. But first I'll give just a little background about the project. I think probably most of you are familiar with this UKRI funded project that Sadie's heading. but this will be a very brief overview in case people are here who aren't familiar with it. So essentially, Sadie was awarded 4 years of funding by the UKRI, and the idea was to explore public benefit in developer-led archaeology, with the goal at the end of creating a toolkit to embed public benefit in developer-led archaeology. Now, Sadie's tool will focus more on project management, and it's integrating or infusing public benefit into the approach we take to project management and delivery in developer-led contexts versus a bolt-on approach. So that kind of tick box exercise of just kind of tacking on maybe some public outreach at the end. And this toolkit should be scalable and flexible, of course, because we work in a range of projects, from major infrastructure, national infrastructure projects to local small evaluation projects, for example. Now, also part of the team has been Dr. Harold Fredheim. He's done a critical literature review asking what is public benefit and how do we tend to implement and evaluate it in developer-led archaeology, so construction-based archaeology, as well as in comparator sectors. And what he's done is he's tried to envision a new model of infusing public benefit into developer-led processes. So on the right of the screen, you can see a bit of a picture, and it's a roadmap, essentially. It's part of a roadmap of how kind of the archaeological process happens within planning, the planning process and our delivery. And tune into his talk. He has one on October 5th and then another one on October 19th to find out how this model is, well, the vision of this model changes, where we think we can bring public benefit into the process itself. And he also presents further questions for consideration. So his critical literature review should be coming out soon, but he will be presenting on it on October 5th and the 19th. And those links will come out with the email that follows this presentation. And then there's me, and I thought I'd give you just a little background on why I decided to join this project, or I asked to. So as Sadie mentioned, I've been working on construction sites for MOLA since about 2015, and I love it. I think it's a lot of fun. It's a really great job in many ways. Sometimes when you're working on the site, you don't see any of the public, but particularly in buildings that overlook site, often you'll see people peering out windows, taking photographs, trying to figure out what's going on, and maybe even approaching you on the street, telling you that they and their coworkers have been, wondering what's going on behind the hoarding, essentially. And to me, that's almost become a metaphor, this hoarding. It's put around sites to protect people, it's a safety barrier, essentially, and it hides the mess of construction, but it also hides us or separates us from the public. So often we go in, we work, we do our work, and we leave, and then we produce reports, of course, that go into the gray literature, and monographs might be produced, but the local community often isn't even aware that we've been there. So I don't know, it meant a lot to me that the work that we do should somehow make a positive impact in the communities that surround our sites. They're impacted by the work that we profit off of, which can be really disruptive, actually, to local communities. So I think we should be giving back as much as we should, or as much as we can. So my role has been, as Sadie mentioned, more of a market research approach to understanding public benefit. And I've been consulting or speaking with, sending surveys out to people in the heritage sector, the development sector, members of the third sector, so social enterprises and charities, and of course, members of the public. And in general, we're interested in what public benefit means to people or organizations, how they'd like to gain from our archaeological work or the archaeological process itself, what kind of impact they would like to see or experience, and if it's relevant, how would they like to evaluate it? And do they see potential for archaeology to contribute to public benefit in the future, on future sites or for future projects? So in tackling public benefit, we're taking two approaches. One of those is well-being. So well-being is how we feel about our lives and how we relate to the people and the spaces and the structures we're a part of. Now, it's been a part of archaeological and heritage-based practice for a little while. For example, in 2018, Historic England came out with their Wellbeing and Historic Environment Framework. And the Heritage Alliance recently evaluated around 30 heritage programs for well-being variables. Now, these two particular examples here use 5 well-being variables that were produced by the National Economics Forum in 2008. We're using a slightly different group of variables, and these come from the What Works Center for Wellbeing. So the What Works Center for Wellbeing collaborated with the Office of National Statistics and Public Health England, and they create a base, and in this case, local government associations and councils, etc. And they were interested in what variables lead to well-being in communities as well as personal well-being. And they came up with these 7 general categories and the variables that are attached to each of those categories. So at the top, you have personal well-being, and those are largely the same variables that are captured by the Office of National Statistics in their annual population survey. So if you feel a sense of autonomy, happiness with your life, life satisfaction, a sense that things in your life are worthwhile, and basically what your level of anxiety is like. You have variables related to the economy, so levels of unemployment and material deprivation, as well as job quality, and also access to jobs within places. You have education and childhood, which is basically lifelong learning, and children's well-being variables. You have equality, and that's well-being inequality that exists within a particular place or wherever you're defining your location. We have health. So that's, do you participate in healthy behavior? How is your overall health and how is your mental health? We have place, and so those are green spaces, which will come up a bit later. Access to green spaces, appropriate housing. Democracy, it's the feeling that you can participate locally and you have a voice and you can influence local decisions. It's your local environment and how safe you feel in it, and it's also access to cultural opportunities. And then we have social relationships, and those are basically, do you have close support networks? Do you trust people in general? Is there a sense of community cohesion, or do you feel that yourself? And also opportunities for volunteering. So our surveys, in part, are modeled on these variables by the What Works Center for Wellbeing. And the other approach we're taking is one of empowerment, because that's intrinsically linked to access to opportunities, to having a voice, being able to make decisions. So this particular model here, it's by Rosa Gonzalez. It's a part of her toolkit. She runs a company called Facilitating Power, and this is for environmental and it's a toolkit for environmental and race power, basically. And so what she's, it's based on Sherry Arnstein's ladder of citizen participation. And basically what you have is, she's got a scale from 0 to 5, and that's basically how much the community is really integrated into the process of whatever it is you're doing. So it ranges from 0, where the local community is completely ignored, to 5, where basically it's in charge of things that are happening. And if you think about developer-led archaeology, we're very low on the scale. So often we go in, we do our work, and we leave, and that's really what it's all about. So we're actually often operating at the lowest point on this scale. Sometimes we have outreach days, local lectures, etc. And you know, that might get us to 1 on the scale, where we're informing people, but we're not really taking into account their perspectives, what's important to them, what their community needs. And particularly in a time of change and disruption, it's important to be able to provide opportunities for empowerment, if possible. So the question is, how can we move up that scale? And so some of the questions in the survey are modeled on participation and how people would want to be involved and what they would like to get out of the process. So the public survey itself was active between March 30th and June 30th of this year, and we used an online platform. Again, there was a dream of going out and being able to talk face to face with people. That wasn't really possible in the time of COVID. We also wanted a bit more of a national or UK-wide picture if possible. So we used this online platform. We did anonymize the data or the data collection process. And the only information that we would have garnered is if somebody wanted to enter to win a £100 voucher. So we incentivized the process. We restricted it to those 18 years and older. And we did translate the survey into several different languages that are common around the London area. And that are also some of our staff speak as well. So we had surveys translated into Bengali, Polish, Spanish, and French. And we distributed links to the survey and information via Twitter, via Facebook. And I have here the MOLA account with restrictions. Basically, we did targeted advertising on Facebook for people who didn't follow MOLA because we wanted to get past the normal archaeology crowd. We went through LinkedIn contacts and professional networks. We asked third sector contacts and other government contacts. And I also tried, just contacting various community groups, particularly associated with the key languages you see above, to see if they'd be interested in participating as well. So our baseline information here, we received more than 614 responses, but that's how many we kept. Some of them were basically quite incomplete. They didn't really hold meaningful data. But we cleansed it, the database for bots and multiple submissions, and that's via the platform algorithms and just reviewing what it had flagged. And surveys varied in completeness. So we wanted everybody to be able to feel comfortable taking the survey. And to do that, we didn't want to require people to answer every question. So unless there was a central question that diverted you down a different route of questioning, we didn't require you to answer, or a respondent to answer a question. And that means you'll see different sample sizes popping up throughout some of the data that I present. So as far as geographic distribution, it's very England heavy. So approximately 95% of respondents were based in England, and a significant proportion of those were in London as well. 132 out of the 418 are in the greater London area. And so not surprisingly, there's a high proportion from city environments, but we also have, close to 30% of respondents live in villages, towns, or the countryside. And here's again some information related to age and sex. So we had respondents from 18 years of age up to 92, with an average of age of 53.4 and a median of 56 years. And we had a higher proportion of people identifying as female responding to the survey versus male. We also had some people who preferred not to say, as well as who preferred to describe. And as far as nationality is concerned, so this is kind of what occurs on a lot of the government surveys. Are you British, mixed British, Irish, Welsh, etc. We had 82% or close to 83% who are based in the UK. And you can see when we asked people to identify themselves, we had a write-in section where they could identify their ethnicity. You can see this word cloud up to the right, which is still very much in line, in a sense, with the people who engage with archaeology. So white and British, there's Fearson's 2018 examination of community archaeology groups. I believe it was 96% white British people identified as. So we still are largely kind of reaching or engaging with those groups, although we've brought the average down just a bit, which I think is a positive sign. And so when the 77 other respondents who noticed that they were other, they could be like British, Dutch. We had Latin American, Berber, Salvadorian respondents. So I feel like we kind of opened up that line of communication a little bit. And survey languages were primarily, excuse me, in English. We had a nice turnout of Polish respondents, and then Spanish and French as well. We had no respondents who took the survey in Bengali. And so moving on to some of the questions, we asked people if they knew what archaeology was. We were wondering what their baseline knowledge was of our fields, and overwhelmingly they knew what archaeology was. Basically close to 100% of respondents. And approximately half of those have either work currently or have worked in the heritage sector. So we have a good amount of people who are familiar with what we do, who have worked in fields that might be related to ours, but there's still approximately 50% who haven't worked in our sector before. And we asked people in the last 10 years, have you lived in an area that's been affected by a construction project? And a high percentage had, close to 80%. And maybe that's not surprising, as a good percentage came from cities. But of course, there are those large infrastructure projects that are crossing the countryside as well. And we asked people, thinking of the impacts of development and the context in which we work, were any places or objects that were meaningful to you disturbed by the development? And a large proportion said yes. 50% of people had something meaningful to them affected by the development process. And when we asked, how did this affect you? So how did it make you feel, or did it change the way you live? Here's a word cloud. We had 192 respondents, and this is the word cloud associated with their responses, their written responses. And you can see that there are words such as sad and loss and destroy. Annoy was another one that came up quite a bit. And people, this is going to be a little bit of a crazy graphic, but I'll just point you to a couple of responses. So this is me trying to code all the responses. Red is negative. Quite negative. Pink is kind of negative. Blue is positive, and purple is kind of a mixed response. And some of the biggest things that people were concerned about were loss of green space. You can see that off to the right. Off to the left, you can see a loss of heritage. Up to the upper right corner, a lot of people mentioned a loss of local character associated with development. People were also worried about wildlife and habitat destruction. Several people also mentioned that they felt like the process wasn't really democratic. So they felt like they didn't really have the power, or they weren't listened to in the process, that it seemed to be more, I guess, catering towards developers themselves. And if you think about these public benefits, these well-being variables we were talking about, generally speaking, it's impacting them negatively. So the question is, how can we bring in something positive? So we asked people, would they actually even like to engage with us? And are they aware that we might be on construction sites? So for those who'd been impacted by construction recently, or within the last 10 years, we asked them if they were aware if archaeologists were working on construction sites that affected them. And, if you think about it, we have around 50% of people who are involved in heritage in some respect, but only about 28% were aware whether or not archaeologists were on sites near them. A little bit above 30% didn't know, and close to 40% were not aware one way or the other whether archaeologists were there or not. And when we asked kind of a strength of feeling question, if you were notified that archaeologists were working in your area, on a scale of 1 not at all to 10 definitely, would you want to engage with them? Obviously, people really want to engage with archaeology. So you see there are 3 options. Would you have wanted to work with the archaeologists, talk to the archaeologists, or learn about the archaeology? And the average response numbers are 7 and above, with the median response number being 9 or 10. And in a sense, these factors map onto those well-being variables because they offer, depending on how we implement them, they offer ways to actually affect everything in this cluster. So depending on how they work with us, maybe it affects the local economy, maybe it offers a sense of or an opportunity to volunteer. Maybe it offers learning opportunities, lifelong learning opportunities, the abilities for them to talk with and connect with their neighbors around the work that we're doing. And it also will help, supposedly, hopefully, connect them to or give them a better sense of place. And if we look at empowerment, the empowerment scale, you know, no longer are we ignoring the local population. We might be informing them, but depending on how we implement our activities, we might actually be moving up that scale to a more inclusive and collaborative approach. But again, that depends on delivery. Oh, oops, sorry. So we also asked people if they didn't want to engage with us, why would that be? Why they would choose not to participate. And there were 212 responses to this question. It was a write-in question. And of those, 114 were not applicable, meaning there's non-participation wasn't really a factor for them. Others said they actually did want to participate. So if you look at the word cloud again, there are a lot of positive words in there, like love, interested, engage, interesting. Now, for those individuals who said they might choose not to participate, the biggest reason was time constraints, and the biggest suggestion they had for mitigating that was offering flexible working hours or flexible hours for them to engage. Some people cited health reasons. For example, older people felt like they might not be as physically able to engage, and those who cited having disabilities were concerned that they wouldn't really be considered, or that their needs wouldn't necessarily be considered for engagement. There are also issues with distance to site people were concerned about, and transportation. There were some people who felt insecure, so they didn't feel like they'd have the knowledge or skills to be able to participate. And 3 individuals mentioned that they actually felt unwelcome when they had approached archaeologists in the past. So we asked, asked people how they might want to engage, and we kind of split the archaeological process into 4 different phases. So pre-excavation, excavation, post-excavation, and more of an information dissemination stage. And so here we have the pre-excavation phase, and we asked, before the excavation starts, archaeologists need to research the history of the area, think of questions that archaeology can help answer, etc. Would you have been interested in? And now respondents were able to tick as many boxes as they wanted. And you can see that we had, you know, close to 400 people saying that they'd actually be interested in thinking about questions about the people who'd lived in the area in the past. Where did they come from? Why did they choose to be there? You know, what were some of their professions, for example? And then also thinking about the local area's character. So maybe why were there particular professions that were prominent in the area? Why did their local area develop the way it did over time, and why does it actually have the character it has today? And people would be interested in researching the area as well, and thinking about the ways that the community could address current concerns using archaeology. And as you can see, and you'll see in these next couple of slides, there are very few people who say they wouldn't be interested in doing any of these things out of the total pool. So that's encouraging, I think. So once again, we're hitting on several of these public benefits. So learning opportunities, socializing with others, creating a sense of place or learning more about the area where you live, offering cultural opportunities. You know, you might be able to target, you know, health in some way, whether it's mental health somehow. And personal well-being also. And again, now we're kind of moving up that scale. We're not just ignoring or informing people working in the, or who live locally, but we're actually actively asking them to participate and to come up with questions as well. So they become more collaborators in the process itself. During the excavations phase, we asked if they'd like to help with finds processing, excavating, discussing with the community what they'd found. And, you know, again, they were able to choose as many as they wanted. And again, there's a decent response rate to effectively each of these answers. And again, it's just hitting on several of these. It has the potential to affect these well-being variables by the What Works Center for Wellbeing. And again, we're increasing the quality of the participation and collaboration with participants if we effectively implement a collaborative framework. In the post-excavation phase, we asked about if they'd be interested in, this is more kind of looking at the data and thinking about what it means. Some of it can be physically entering data into a database. Maybe that's what somebody wants to do or feels comfortable doing. But some of it, and it seemed like people were most interested in thinking about what the data meant. So to understand how people lived in the past and to understand how the site formed over time. And again, we're hitting on these basic principles. We can attend to them in different ways as long as you know, a project is well implemented and we're not just kind of using people to get the data for ourselves. And again, here we are, we're moving up that scale, and depending on how we implement our programs or our collaborations, you know, we can move our impact, or the impact that we're able to provide, hopefully up that scale of empowerment for communities. And then finally, in the dissemination phase, we have thinking of other ways that the archaeology could be useful for their communities, discussing the archaeology and what it means with their communities, and teaching others about the history of the community. And again, people seemed relatively interested in participating in these particular phases or activities, I should say. And again, here we are, we're hitting on several of the well-being principles, giving people a voice, you know, helping them create a sense of community cohesion, for example, helping foster that sense of place, potentially volunteering opportunities or skills, training opportunities for employment, for example. So it really depends on how we model and implement what we do. And again, it's moving up that scale past just ignoring or informing the local populations around our sites. And again, personal benefits, I mean, these are basically based on the What's the Works Center for Wellbeing variables, but people were interested in gaining knowledge. That was their top priority. That was the #1 result that they'd like. They'd also like to feel more connected to the past. This is for them themselves. We asked them to rank the top 3 benefits they'd like. They could have ranked all 16 if they wanted to, 1 to 16. But gaining knowledge was #1. Feeling more connected to the past was high up on the list, as well as feeling more connected to where someone lived, and contributing to education in the community. So those are the top 5 well-being results that people would like for themselves. And for their communities, they're quite similar. So gaining historical knowledge of the community, feeling more connected. They want the community to feel more connected to where they live and to the past, to contribute to the community's education and to contribute to the community's future. So again, those are the top 5 variables coming out. So towards the end of the survey, we actually asked people, what is community? In your mind, what is community? And a lot of people thought about their local area. So they are thinking in a geographic sense. And the question might be, why is that the case? And basically, we need to collect more data to find this out. But there's a 2000 report that kind of touches on this as well. And it might be that even though we were able to kind of diversify the respondent, have a more diverse respondent base, we still have a lot of people who identify as British, as UK nationality, and I wonder if, if you're part of the main kind of cultural identity. It's not, place makes sense in a sense of a way to think of who your community is. Whereas if you're not from here, then maybe there are other identifying characteristics that, or other characteristics associated with identity that are more important for your sense of community. So we'll need to explore that further, basically. And when we asked how people wanted to be contacted and informed if we're in the area, if they'd like to participate with or interact with our work, if we're near them, the #1 response, which surprised me a little bit, was letter drops. And also the local newspaper, or a local newsletter and a local newspaper article. Social media was also a decent response. And really what this might reflect is we still have a respondent population that's still skewed to a slightly older population. So maybe, you know, social media is something that a younger group would target more frequently. So what does this all mean? I think it means that members of the public are definitely interested in what we do. So we close ourselves off again behind that hoarding, but at least from this survey, from this pool of respondents, what we can see is that people are interested in engaging, and they want to engage more fully, or they'd be interested in it at least. So for example, helping think of local research aims, or questions about their community, or ways to actually catalyze the archaeology into something that's meaningful for their community in whatever respect that might be. We need to keep trying to move beyond the normal base. And the question, I guess, coming off of that is how will that influence the trends that we see? And we have the capacity or potential to create positive impact amidst disruption. So again, development, while, you know, I might love going to a site and exploring what's there, there is an impact on the local community, and we need to be mindful of that and think about how we can give back. And that requires, to a certain extent, divesting power from ourselves to help empower communities, to include them in the process, and hopefully bring them in as collaborators as much as is possible within the system that we work. So these are some of the references from the presentation today. And as far as next steps, we're going to continue. I'll continue with some survey analysis, and we'll generate some reports and materials based on the survey results. We'd like to make them accessible to people and not just in a report form. We'll also continue consulting with the sectors that I mentioned earlier, as well as with members of the public. So we're currently in the process of beginning to organize focus groups that we hope to recruit from around the London office. So we want to keep it local and also include multilingual community members as well. And I think that's it. So we have, if people want to ask questions, that's great. Maybe Sadie, I will hand it back to you.
Thank you very much. That was amazing, Kate. Thank you.